Wyoming Territory, spring of 1882, the wind came down from the bighorns sharp as a knife when Lawson Dearing found her lying by the fence line, dress torn, shoes gone, and blood dried along one side of her face. He was on his way back from checking the north pasture, reins loose in one hand when his horse snorted and stopped short. She was half covered in dust and barely conscious, but her eyes opened when he crouched beside her. "Can you hear me?" he asked, already shrugging out of his coat. "You hurt bad," she blinked slowly. "No, just tired." Her voice was hoarse, her lips cracked, but the words were clear. She was young, maybe 20, with dark auburn hair tangled down her back and bruises blooming beneath the dirt. He slipped his arms under her, lifting her as carefully as he could. "I'm Lawson, you're safe now." She didn't answer. Her head dropped against his shoulder. Her name was Roslyn Warren. She said it quiet, 2 days later when the fever broke and she was strong enough to sit up in the spare bed. Lawson brought her broth and water, clearing his throat before he asked, "What happened?" Roslyn looked down at her hands. "I was working for the Jellicoes out past Silver Creek. When Mr. Jellicoe's son came back from Cheyenne, she stopped, jaw tightening. Things got dangerous. I ran." Lawson didn't press her. He nodded once, then stood to stoke the fire. "I can leave in the morning," she said behind him. "You are not going anywhere," he said without turning. "You can stay here as long as you need." Her breath caught just a little. "People will talk," he turned then, gaze steady. Let them. People did talk. By the week's end, half the town was whispering about the girl up at Dearing's ranch, the one no one thought would ever marry. Some said she was cursed. Others said she had invited trouble. A few remembered her mother, a washerwoman who died young, and figured the girl would go the same way. Lawson ignored them all. He ran his cattle, mended the barn roof, and kept the fire lit in the room Roslyn now slept in. She helped where she could, sweeping, cooking, mending his shirts with small, neat stitches. She never asked for more than what he gave, but one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun fall behind the hills, she said softly, "I know what folks think. That no man will have me now." Lawson glanced at her, then looked away. "People say a lot of things. They think I'm ruined." He didn't move, just let the silence stretch between them. "I'm not," she said, lower now. "I never let him." Lawson turned then, really looked at her. Her chin was lifted, mouth tight, but her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "You do not have to tell me that," he said. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she whispered. "I just want you to know the truth." He nodded once. "I believe you." By mid-May, the ranch felt different, brighter. Warmer. Roslyn baked bread that made the house smell like home. She laughed sometimes, soft and surprised, and Lawson found himself looking for reasons to stay near her, fixing the porch rail twice, helping her carry water when she clearly did not need the help. One morning she brought him coffee where he was mending saddle straps in the barn. "You always work this hard?" she asked, handing him the cup. Lawson smiled slightly. "Only when someone brings me coffee." She sat beside him on the bench, close enough he could feel the warmth of her, but she said nothing more, just watched him work, fingers tapping the rim of her mug. "I never thought I'd be here," she said after a long stretch. "Safe." "Wanted?" Lawson's hand stilled. "You are wanted," he said quietly without looking up. She turned her head toward him, and for a moment all he saw was her, not the bruises, not the whispers, just her, strong and soft and still standing. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Because I want to be." She stared at him, breath shallow, eyes searching his face. Then she stood, and for a second he thought she might leave, but instead she bent and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Light, quick, fierce. "I will wash the linens," she said, and walked away. He sat there long after she was gone, fingers tight around the coffee cup, heart thudding like hooves on hard ground. By June, they were falling into rhythm. Roslyn took to the ranch like she had always belonged. She rode out with him to check the cattle, her skirts hitched up and hair braided tight. She taught him how to sew a proper patch, and he showed her how to shoot his old Colt. "You trust me with a gun?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I trust you more than most men I know," he said, and meant it. That night they ate supper on the porch steps, knees touching. The sky was full of stars and the air smelled like sweetgrass. "I do not know what this is," Roslyn said, voice low, "but I feel it, between us." Lawson set his tin plate aside. I feel it too. She reached for his hand. He took it, fingers curling around hers like he had been waiting his whole life to do it. In early July, a rider came up the trail. Lawson was in the barn, Roslyn hanging laundry behind the house. The man was tall, mean-looking, with a scar down one cheek. "You got a girl here?" he asked, spitting dust. Lawson stepped down off the porch. "You got a name?" Carl Jellicoe came to take her back. Lawson's jaw flexed. "She is not going anywhere with you," the man laughed. "She is mine." Lawson drew his revolver slow and steady. "She is not yours. And if you ride past that gate again, I will bury you where you fall." Carl's eyes narrowed. "You willing to kill over her?" "I am." The man looked past him, saw Roslyn standing by the laundry line, shotgun resting in her arms. She did not flinch, did not blink. Carl spat again. "Not worth it," he muttered, turning his horse. "She ain't worth nothing." Lawson watched him ride away, then turned to Roslyn. "You all right?" She nodded, but when he reached her, her hands were shaking. He took the shotgun, set it aside, and pulled her into his arms. "I will never let anyone hurt you again." She pressed her face to his chest, arms wrapping around him tight. "I believe you," she whispered. That night, Roslyn sat beside him in the dark, her hand over his. "I thought no one would ever want me," she said. "I thought I would be alone forever." Lawson turned to her. "I want you." She looked up, eyes wide. "I love you," he said. "I have for a while now." Roslyn's face crumpled, sudden and full of everything she had held in. She laughed through her tears, then kissed him, not soft this time, but certain. "I love you too," she said when they broke apart, and Lawson felt like the ground had shifted beneath him in the best way. He pulled her close, holding her like he never meant to let go, and he did not. The wild rye had grown tall around the edge of the pasture by the time Roslyn asked him to ride with her to the old stone bluff above the creek. The sky was washed in that summer blue that seemed to go on forever, and she'd packed a small basket wrapped in a cloth, though she said nothing about what was inside. They rode in silence for most of the way, her on the paint mare, him on his gelding, listening to the wind stir through the cottonwoods. When they reached the bluff, she dismounted first and walked to the edge, eyes scanning the wide bend of the water below. "I used to think places like this were only in books," she said, not turning. "But then I got here, and it was real." Lawson tied off the reins and stepped beside her, the breeze tugging at the corner of his shirt. "I used to come here after my father died," he said. "Never brought anyone else." Roslyn glanced at him then, something soft flickering in her gaze. "Why me?" he shrugged. "Because I wanted to share it." She set the basket down and opened it slowly. Inside were 2 biscuits, a jar of plum preserves, and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in paper. She laid them out on a folded cloth and sat cross-legged beside it. "I traded Mrs. Lorne for the plums," she said. "She needed her porch swept." He sat across from her, taking the jar when she offered it. "You're getting good at finding ways." "I had to be," she said. "When I was younger, I thought hard work would earn me safety. Turns out it just made me invisible to the wrong people." He didn't answer right away. The water below glinted in the sun, and the quiet between them settled like a blanket. "I see you," he said finally. "Always have." She took a bite of biscuit, then looked up at him with a crooked smile that didn't hide the emotion behind it. "I know, that's what scares me." They sat there until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the grass. When they mounted to ride back, Roslyn reached for his hand before swinging into the saddle. "I never knew a man could be gentle," she said. He held her gaze. "I never knew a woman could be braver." They rode back side by side, the hush between them no longer uncertain but full. Later that week, a letter arrived. The post rider handed it over with a raised brow, but Lawson just nodded and took it inside. Roslyn was shelling beans at the table when he handed it to her. "It's from Mrs. Hargrave," she said, turning it over. "She used to keep me in her kitchen when the Jellicoes had visitors." Lawson leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "She says she heard I left, says she's glad I made it out. And that if I ever need a witness to what happened, she'll speak up." "You want to respond?" Roslyn folded the letter carefully, smoothing the crease. "I think I do." She didn't say more, but that night, after she'd gone to bed, Lawson found the paper and ink in the drawer and left them on her table. In August, the rains came late. The ground cracked in places and the cattle grew restless. Roslyn took over tending the garden, hauling buckets from the well in the early hours before the heat settled in. At night, she soaked her feet in the basin and read the battered copy of Ivanhoe he'd found for her in town. One evening, as she rubbed salve into her calves, she looked up and asked, "Did you ever think you'd marry?" Lawson set down the harness he'd been oiling. "Didn't think I'd find someone who'd want to stay." She tilted her head. "You're not easy, but you're steady," he chuckled. "That a compliment? It's the best kind." He crossed the room, kneeling beside her basin. She watched him, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to read something in his face. "I want to ask you something," he said. She didn't move. "All right. I want to marry you. Not because of what we've been through, not to fix anything, because I love you and I want to build a life with you on purpose." She didn't speak at once. Her hand drifted to his shoulder, resting there like it belonged. "I've been waiting to feel sure," she said. "Not about you, about me. But I feel it now. I want that life too." He nodded, breath catching low in his throat. Then he leaned in and kissed her, slow and certain, the way a man kisses the woman who will be his wife. They married beneath the cottonwoods behind the barn, just the preacher, Ruth and Elias from the neighboring ranch, and a pair of witnesses from town. Roslyn wore a dress Ruth had hemmed by hand, pale blue with a bit of lace at the collar. Lawson had never seen anything so fine. After the vows, she rested her hand on his chest and whispered, "You gave me back my name." He brushed his thumb over hers. "You made this place a home." They danced once in the yard to the sound of Elias's fiddle, then the guests left and the sky filled with stars. Inside, she unpinned her hair and stood beside the bed, fingers twining with his as he stepped close. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then her mouth. "Neither am I." And when they lay down together, it was not to forget the past, but to begin something that would outlast it. The wind moved through the grass outside, steady and low, and the world held its breath as two people, once broken, chose each other for good. By late September, the mornings carried a breath of frost. The wind came heavier off the hills, and the cattle stayed close to the lower fields. Roslyn pulled her shawl tighter as she walked with Lawson toward the barn, the hem of her skirt brushing against the cold, stiff grass. "Elias said we might see snow before the month's out," Lawson said as he opened the door. Roslyn stepped inside, blinking at the dim light. "I've never spent a winter this far north." Lawson paused, leaning a forearm on the stall gate. "It's quiet, long days. But if the roof holds and the fire stays strong, it can be good." She rested her hand on one of the posts. "I think I'd like that, a season with no one coming or going." He turned toward her. "Then that's what we'll have." They spent the rest of the day stacking the last of the chopped wood beneath the lean-to, working shoulder to shoulder without needing to fill the space with talk. The air smelled of pine and old bark. When they finished, Lawson straightened and brushed his hands against his trousers. "We'll need to trap if the stores run low," he said. "Rabbit mostly, maybe fox." Roslyn nodded. "I can learn." He studied her a moment, then gave a single nod and started toward the house. She followed, her boots crunching on the dry earth. Inside, she lit the fire while he brought in water. By the time dusk settled over the porch, the hearth was glowing and a pot of lentils simmered on the stove. She sat back on her heels and watched the flames flicker up the stone. "Did your mother ever teach you songs?" she asked. Lawson looked up from where he sat oiling one of the lanterns. "Some, mostly hymns." "My mother sang while she worked, not church songs, just little ones from her own childhood. I remember one about a sparrow and a winter apple." He set the lantern aside. "Will you sing it?" Roslyn hesitated, then hummed a soft tune, the words almost whispered. Her voice held a quiet lilt, not polished, but full of something steady and warm. When she stopped, the silence that followed felt like part of the song. "She'd have liked you," she said. Lawson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How old were you when she passed?" 14. "After that, I worked for my keep, didn't sing for a long time." He didn't try to answer that. Just reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. That night they slept with the window cracked just enough to hear the wind. Roslyn stirred once before dawn, her hand brushing his chest. "I want to make something of this place," she murmured. Not just survive it, we will. I want to plant things, not just gather them. I want to teach the land to remember me. He didn't open his eyes. It already does. In the weeks that followed, Roslyn began clearing the patch near the back fence, turning soil with the old spade she found in the shed. She dragged stones to the side and kept her notes in a folded scrap of paper tucked inside a flour tin. Lawson built a frame for a cold box near the kitchen wall, and Roslyn lined it with straw. Together they tanned the last of the hides from the autumn butchering, their hands stained with salt and smoke. One afternoon, as they spread the leather across the rack, Roslyn said, "I never thought I'd own anything that lasted, not really." Lawson looked up, the sun catching the line of his jaw. "You own your name, that's the first thing." She tied the last corner of the hide and stepped back. "And the second," he reached for her wrist, tugging her gently toward him. "This life, if you want it." She didn't answer with words, just leaned her forehead against his and let the stillness say the rest. By the turn of October, the first snow dusted the porch railings. The horses huffed clouds into the air and icicles formed under the eaves. Roslyn stood at the window one morning, watching the white settle on the fence posts. "I used to dread winter," she said. Lawson came up behind her, resting his chin on her shoulder. And now, she watched a hawk glide low over the field. "Now it feels like the world's finally quiet enough to breathe." He slid his arms around her waist. "You give it that." They stood like that for a long while, watching the hush of snow fall over their land. Later, as they shelled corn by the stove, Roslyn stretched her legs across Lawson's lap and said, "I've been thinking about building something in the spring. A little shed near the garden. For drying herbs and keeping seed. You already planning for next year? I want it to be bigger than just us. Someday, maybe, someone else might need a place to start over, like I did." Lawson set the corn aside. "You're thinking of turning this into a refuge," she shrugged. "Maybe not now. But I want it to be a place where peace grows." He nodded, thoughtful. "Then we'll build it." Roslyn smiled at that, slow and quiet, and leaned in to kiss him with the certainty of a woman who had finally found her home. Outside, the wind swept across the hills, but inside the house, the warmth held steady. And in the silence between them, something lasting took root, something shaped by hands that had known loss, and hearts that had chosen one another against every storm. The first calf came early that year, a red heifer with a white blaze and a stubborn streak that reminded Roslyn of herself. She found it just after dawn, half hidden in the grass near the south slope, its mother standing guard with wary eyes. Lawson had gone into town for salt blocks and a new bridle, so she knelt alone in the brittle cold, whispering to the calf as she checked its legs. "You're stronger than you look," she said softly, brushing clumps of matted birth hair from its side. "That'll serve you well out here." She stayed until the sun crested the hills, then made her way back to the house with stiff fingers and a heart that felt unexpectedly full. Before, she'd never known what it meant to belong to a place so completely. Now she woke with the land and slept beneath its rhythm. When Lawson returned that evening, pulling the wagon behind him with sacks of feed lashed down and his hat dusted with road grit, she met him at the gate. "There's a calf," she said without preamble. "Healthy. Came in the early hours." He jumped down from the wagon bed, hand already brushing the back of her neck as if to reassure himself she was real. "You check the hooves, firm, no curling." He kissed her temple. "You did good." She reached for one of the sacks, but he caught her wrist. "I got it." "Go finish what you were writing this morning." She hesitated. "I saw the pages by the stove," he added. "You're building something, Roslyn. Don't let the practical get in the way of the rest." Back inside, she unfolded the worn ledger she'd taken to keeping a loose patchwork of planting notes, herbal experiments, and a list of names. Women she remembered from the places she'd worked, the ones who'd spoken quiet things over wash basins or in the corners of kitchens. Me, who always had a bruise hidden under her collar. Eliza, who walked with a limp after falling from a hayloft no one believed had been an accident. Clara, who'd stopped speaking entirely the day her father married her off at 16. Roslyn dipped her pen, heart steady. She added a line beneath the last name. "This place is for remembering. for beginning again. That night they ate by lamplight, the wind scraping dry branches against the window. "I saw the sheriff today," Lawson said around a mouthful of cornbread. "He asked after you." Roslyn set her fork down. "He mentioned the Jellicos are packing up, moving east. Said the younger one's been keeping to himself since the incident." She didn't speak right away. Her gaze drifted to the fire. "I don't want to build my life around what he took," she said at last, "but I want to be ready if someone like him turns up again." Lawson nodded. "I've been thinking about fencing the North Ridge. Keep strays out, keep the shape of the land ours." She reached across the table, fingers curling around his. "Yes, let's do that." The next morning, she rode out alone to the bluff where they'd once shared biscuits and plum preserves. She carried with her a small pouch stitched shut with blue thread. Inside were dried mint leaves, sage from the garden, and a single crow feather she'd found beneath the barn eaves. She buried it at the edge of the bluff, her breath rising in small clouds as she pressed the soil firm with both palms. "For what was," she whispered, "and for what will be." When she rode back, the chimney was smoking and the porch swept clean. Lawson met her at the edge of the yard, his sleeves rolled to the elbows and sawdust in his hair. "Come see," he said. Behind the barn, he'd started a frame. 4 posts squared and level marked the beginning of what would be her shed, her place. She stepped into the square, boots crunching on dry earth. "It's real now," she said. He stood beside her, resting a hand against the beam. "It's yours." In the weeks that followed, they built it together. She sanded each board by hand. He carved a small sparrow above the lintel without comment. They hung the door on a chill morning, the hinges creaking as it swung open to the empty, sunlit space. She stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the light shift across the floorboards. "Someday," she said, "I'll hang herbs from these rafters. I'll dry roots and mix salves. Maybe even pass it on." Lawson stepped behind her, arms loose around her waist. "And until then," she leaned back against him, "I'll live fully here. With you." Later, as dusk settled and the first stars blinked out above the hills, they sat on the front steps with a blanket shared across their laps. The house held the scent of cedar from the new shed, and the silence between them was thick with promise. Roslyn rested her head against his shoulder. "You know," she said, "they used to say I'd never marry." Lawson didn't laugh. He just kissed her hair and murmured, "They didn't know you." She turned her face toward his. "No, but you did," and he had. From the first moment he found her in the dust, to the day he married her under open sky and every sunrise after. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, while the wind moved softly over the fields they'd made their own. By the last week of October, the soil was too stiff to turn, and frost clung to the edges of the window panes in the hours before dawn. Roslyn had begun sewing small cloth pouches for dried plants, lavender, yarrow, sweet bay, each labeled in her careful hand with the intended use and date harvested. Lawson built her a shelf inside the shed for them, sanding each board smooth so no splinters would catch on her sleeves. The first time she used one of the poultices on Elias's sprained wrist, he'd looked at her with something close to awe and asked if she planned to open a practice. "I'm not a doctor," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "No," Elias told her, "but you're something better. You listen." Word traveled quiet but sure. By early November, women came up the trail in 2s and 3s, some bringing winter squash or wool, others nothing but their stories. Roslyn never turned them away. One afternoon, Lawson stepped into the house to find 2 women seated at the kitchen table, one cradling a red-cheeked toddler, the other nursing a bruised hand and speaking low while Roslyn wrapped it in linen. He stepped back outside without a word, letting the door fall gently behind him. That night he found her soaking the linens in the wash basin, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. "You've been quiet," she said without looking up. "I've been watching." She wrung out the cloth and met his eyes. "Does it worry you?" He leaned against the wall. "No, just reminds me how many folks never had someone to come home to." Roslyn nodded, mouth tight. "I know what that's like." He crossed to her, took the cloth from her hands and folded it. "You've built something steady here." "It matters." She leaned against his chest, her breath warm through his shirt. "I didn't mean to become something to other people. I just wanted a place to be safe." Lawson smoothed a hand over her back. Sometimes safety grows roots in more than one direction. The next morning, snow fell thick and slow, covering the world in hush. Roslyn stood at the window, arms crossed over her chest, watching the flakes gather on the fence rails. "I never asked, did your mother make it through many winters up here?" she said. Lawson pulled on his boots by the hearth. "Just the last one. She passed the following spring." "Was she kind?" He straightened, brushing straw off his coat. "She was quiet, thoughtful. Made stew even when we barely had anything to put in it. She used to say the land owed us nothing, and that was what made it sacred." Roslyn turned toward him. "She sounds like someone I'd have liked. She'd have liked you. You don't ask the land to make you more than you are. You meet at level." They spent the day hauling wood and setting traps along the ridge. At dusk, as they returned to the house, Roslyn paused near the gate and looked back. "I've been thinking about those names I wrote down," she said. "They deserve more than just a list." Lawson adjusted the rope in his hand. "What do you want to do?" "I want to plant something for each of them. Herbs, mostly, something useful. Let their names come back each spring." She waited, unsure if he'd see the sense in it. He nodded once. "Then we'll mark the ground together." That night, he gave her a box made of pine, small and plain, with a carved sparrow on the lid. "For your seeds," he said, "and whatever else you want to keep close." Her fingers curled around the edges, eyes bright. "I'll start tomorrow." The snow deepened with each passing week. They spent the evenings stitching, reading aloud, and talking of what would come once the thaw returned. Roslyn began sketching the layout for her herb beds, marking each space with the name of one woman who'd come to her door. One night she stirred the embers after supper and said, "I never told you I used to dream of escaping to the coast. Thought if I could just make it to water, I'd be free." Lawson leaned back in his chair. "You still want that?" She looked around the room, the light catching the lines of her face. "No, turns out freedom feels a lot like knowing who you are and not needing to run from it." He stood and crossed to her, took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "Then you found it." They kissed beneath the lamplight, slow and sure, with the kind of knowing that came from building something with bare hands and open hearts. Spring came late, but when it did, it came all at once, mud rising in the gullies, birdsong threading through the trees, and the scent of thawed earth returning to the wind. Roslyn planted her garden in rows as planned, each seed pressed into the ground with care. Lawson built a low fence to keep the deer from trampling the young shoots. She knelt in the dirt, sleeves pushed high, and spoke each name aloud as she worked. When she reached the last row, Lawson came to stand beside her, holding the pine box. "You should keep this shed door open," he said. "Let the wind move through it." She smiled and took the box from him, tucking it inside beneath the shelf where the sun would warm it each morning. By late May, the herbs had taken hold. Bees drifted lazily over the blooms, and the soil held firm beneath their boots. Women still came, but fewer now. Some had found homes, others had found strength. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Roslyn and Lawson sat at the edge of the bluff for the first time since before the snow. The land stretched wide and open, alive in a way it hadn't been months ago. "We did it," she said. Lawson wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We're still doing it." She leaned into him. "I never thought love would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like something I built with my own 2 hands. He kissed her hair. "That's the best kind." They sat in quiet, watching the last light fade. The wind rolled soft through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and cedar. Behind them, the house stood warm and waiting, and the herb garden bloomed in the fading gold. In the years that followed, the land grew fuller. The shed became a place of healing. The garden stretched wider. Children's laughter echoed across the yard. Nieces, nephews, the children of women who had once arrived with nothing but their names and left with something more. Roslyn's hands stayed busy. Lawson's shoulders never lost their strength. And through each season, they remained each other's still point in a world that kept turning. They never left the ranch. They never needed to. Together, they lived long and well. In the house they'd built not just with wood and stone, but with trust and time and the quiet, steady bloom of love that never once asked for anything but the truth.